Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
We're back on.
Okay.
Talking about narrating stories, right?
Right. Here's a statement of significance here, as is characteristic of Israel's narrative art. The speeches are more interest and importance than the action. Did you catch that? The speeches are more interest and importance than the action. It's part of the art. So we've got dialogue, in other words, that says, hey, you really got to pay attention to that. Okay? Conversation and biblical narrative conversations are never precise and naturalistic imitations of real-life conversations. They're concentrated, stylized, devoid of idle chatter. All the details they contain are carefully calculated to fulfill a clear function. Okay, so pay attention to dialogue. Okay. Statements made by characters provide insight into their traits. In fact, that's sometimes the only way in which you get any insight into the persons themselves. Okay. Significantly as well, conversation points to meaning. Dialogue is made to carry a large part of the freight of meaning for the whole story. Okay. So, two more ideas, he says, that deserve attention. Direct speech said in formal verse often has a summarizing or a ceremonial function. Okay. So direct speech, formal verse, that means it's in poetry, if you will. Okay. Second, in contrasted dialogue, the contrasting speech of the two characters accomplishes differentiation. That is, a contrast between ideas or concepts or even persons. Okay. The illustration that we've had between, either we've had here, or it's in one of my other readings, is between Esau and Jacob in their problem with the birthright issue. Just simply the statements they make and how they say it differentiate between the characteristics of the individual. Esau was very much person of the moment, and very eager for the momentary thing, and not a whole lot of foresight for the future. Jacob was altogether different from that. It's much more, as his name means, of course, a schemer. We are planning for the future in a very significant way. Okay?
Made some good stew, though.
Huh?
You made some good stew.
Apparently so. Give attention to the development of characters. Okay, well, mostly that's going to be through, frankly, what they say, more often than not. Okay? And we did a lot of stuff on David. Actually, we know more about David than almost any of the other characters in the Old Testament. And interestingly enough, we know very little about what he looks like. How he was. Probably shorter than Saul, since Saul, it says he was head above everybody else, and Samuel went out to choose a king, right? In that story. And then David was probably not the dominating physical figure, because he was the last one that Samuel was told to choose when he was in the least of Samuel's choice, given the nature, but we don't know much about him beyond that. Okay. So
we can assume things, though, right?
What?
We can assume things, like if he's a shepherd, he's probably not a big fat guy.
We can assume things, right? Yeah, and sometimes that's kind of the way in which you get to know a character. Well, he was a shepherd. Okay, he was a shepherd. Now you can say he was a king. That doesn't say much except, okay, he had power and authority. We don't know much more about it at that point, Right? Maybe some political aspirations or whatever else, or just had the right parents, Right?
But if you kill a lion when you're young and fair.
Right? So that says something about his skill with the slingshot. right?
Yeah.
And so when it comes down to the Goliath story, okay, he was a skilled person, right? And that little instrument, if you will. But we don't know much more about him other than those kinds of little snippets, you see. Right? Oh, he said something like he was something about the sweet psalmist of Israel or something, so he apparently had some sort of aesthetic nature mentioned to him, right? So, but that's how we figure it out, more by his statements, and by his actions and his speeches, and more than by a narrative breaking in and giving us a whole rundown. Okay, so pay attention to that. Let's see. Here's one that you might be interested in your work. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't for you. Names can contribute to the author's intent by giving opportunity for forming puns, creating irony, or highlighting characteristic qualities. That thing you pointed out about Jacob, that pun in there, that's one of those examples. Okay. Also, we know when it says, that Jabez was called Jabez because why? Remember that story, 1 Chronicles 4, 9 and 10? Story in the middle of all those names, and all of a sudden 2 verses of a story in the middle of all those names. Yeah. His mother bore him with pain, and therefore they call him Jabez, because he was, caused a lot of pain. But there's a little adjustment to the letter, just so that, but it's very clear. It states it. That's why he was named what he was, you see. And the whole story, there's a significant issue here. Okay? You don't have time to go into that. The real story of Jabez, not the one that's on the bestseller list. The fact that the name itself became a very significant part of that story. Here's an individual whose name, this guy causes pain, and the story suggests, in fact, that he was an individual who stood in contrast to that very main designation. Right? And that was his intent. And then he uses even the difference between Jacob and Israel in that segment. He kind of focuses, name things again. So it's very important. Could be very significant. Here's, I like this idea here about, this is kind of ironic here. We got Barak, which means lightning in Hebrew. And yet he was anything but a lightning rod. He was some sort of a wind, And Deborah, here's Deborah means what? Well, it means a bee. I like this conclusion down here about Deborah, and then about Jael. The meaning of Jael, that woman is a mountain goat. This conclusion, Jael the mountain goat provided the fleeing Sisera with nourishing milk and then stabbed him when he lay down to rest. As a result, peace was restored to the promised land of milk and honey. Bee bringing milk, mountain goat. Bee bringing milk. It's kind of interesting how that worked out with the names there. Okay, so names contribute also to the book of Ruth. Somewhere he talks about this. These 2 kids that died. One was sickly, the other one failing. They lived up to their name. Okay? And then, of course, in the book itself, Mara, don't call me Mara, that's my name, that's what it means. Call me something else, because I'm pretty bitter about don't call me Naomi, which means bloody, but call me Mara, which means bitter. But the whole book, from her perspective, is one who became something other than bitter. Okay? So there's a name issue involved with that. Consider the significance of descriptive details. Old Testament narratives are marked by a spare style. In other words, you don't put anything in there that you don't need. Right? Actually, that's a pretty good writing technique anyway. When I was working on some writing, I forget what it was, I was talking to this alt scholar in this area. He said, I pulled over this from a book. I'm writing something to the effect of, they write your first draft, Okay? And in the second draft, see if you can say the same thing with 50% less words. That's kind of a goal. It just sharpens up your writing something immensely. Okay? Got to get all that padding out of there. Anyway, suggestion aside, no charge. Okay, alter again refers to the rigorous economy of biblical narrative. Okay, not a lot of expansive, so pay attention to what is there, because that all what is there is very important. Okay, so what's there, what is important, and what doesn't need to be said. Okay. Therefore, every detail, did you get this? Every detail in biblical narrative merits attention. Every detail. And that means then we have to do very detailed work, right? Okay. So, keep that in mind. Notice how the story uses the technique of repetition. Very significant in Alfred's book, probably the best chapter in his book, frankly. Repetition. Did he say this? No, that's not good. The frequency of repetition in the Bible, the modern standards, lies in the blindness of the fact that the narrator actually foregoes advice much more often than he employs it. In other words, what he's really saying there is, you've got so much repetition here, right? It becomes a significant issue when somebody chooses not to have it. You see what I'm saying? At some point, when the norm would be to repeat something and it's not there. We'll see an example of this, in one of the illustrations I have from the story. Okay? In other words, Hebrew narrative used repetition economically, reserving it for those times when it was needed to make significant rhetorical effect. Okay, so keep that in mind. We have repetition. Okay? Where does it occur? Well, it occurs all over the place, actually. And we'll get into the details there. It may occur by means of a key word. This is another very significant thing. We already mentioned it because it was in the other book, the Whiteboard here. Okay? Key word that keeps cropping up. Okay? Or not just the word itself with the same connotation or even denotation, but the same root when they have different connotations or different denotations, rather. Okay? The same root occurs when there could have been other words used without that root. You're following a theme, you're doing something with that. Okay? So, let's keep that in mind. Okay? Here you go. Just as a lawyer's performance in the courtroom depends on hours of competent research and preparation, a preacher's effectiveness in the public depends on hours, hard to say that, isn't it? Minutes of competent exegesis. No, hours of competent exegesis and study. Okay? Hours. Takes time. Let's do it right. Okay? And there's some homiletical diagrams I won't go into and deal with that when you deal with Dan Darwin's homiletics course there. Okay. If a preacher's goal is to be expositional, what is more expositional than preaching the text in its storyline form? That's a new thought. Right? Why did they, if preaching is, if the stories were there in part to preach, and the New Testament seems to indicate that's part of his goal, right? Why did they tell stories and not just give us dissertations? Right? Well, story was effective means, if you will, of both remembering and communicating and even being able to pass it down. Because you remember a story, you can't remember a dissertation. Right? How many times have you gone to listen to a sermon, a wonderful exposition with a wonderful illustration, and 2 days later the only thing you remember is the illustration. And you don't. And the only problem with that is it doesn't connect you back to the biblical text. Okay, that's the problem. A great story, I don't remember what was for. It was a great story, you see. Okay, so that's just kind of a summary, and I brought that out because he uses many of the books that I could have brought if I had a 747 to come up and show you, straight read from. That would be boring. Okay, so this is key. Now here's some purposes of stories. Okay. Not all, so you can talk with more. There's historical. Some stories exist to explain the meaning of events. Okay. Cause, effect, meaning. And of course you find that in Chronicles, don't you? The meaning, the cause and effect issue. This king did such and such and had this effect on Israel, right? And so that's some of the reasons why. And then this whole king's reign has an effect on the bigger picture. Theological, to demonstrate God's actions in history. Remember, this is theological or sacred history, okay? Not just secular or world history, if you will. Ideological, there's something we haven't seen, word we don't use every day. Simple, existing to explain the origin of certain things. And these sometimes could be some of those things that the narrator throws in there for historical benefit, that is, for ideological benefit. Okay? But it's not going to be a mainline theme of the story. Ethnological, identifications of peoples. Etymological, explanations of names and places. We'll have that one today. Cultic, originations of institutions or ideas. Geological, explanations of certain physical phenomena that occur. Theological, tracing the progress of salvation in history. Okay? That's probably, that would be probably part of the overall reason for the story. That will become part of your preaching or teaching, I suspect, at that point. And moral, that is, stories exist to highlight moral decision, good or ill, and I didn't put that. That one's not in the notes, I don't think. We wrote it into that one, I think. Okay. You have a first edition. First editions are not always the better editions. Okay, so then from the standpoint of narrative, just a review, this becomes a review. The storyline must be understood as a setting, pacing, tension, crisis, climax, resolution, all of that. Particular pericope, you know what a pericope is? What that word means?
Unit of thought.
Unit, okay, unit is cut around, and it's a complete section that could be separated, if you will. Cut away from its context.
Why do they pronounce it that way?
Because that's, I don't know, it's probably the proper way. How would you like to pronounce it? Pericope?
It does look like that, doesn't it? I have to admit. In my uneducated...
Well, it's from Greek, and peri is a preposition in culture. That's the cope part. It's from cope, which is a Greek word for...
Cut around certain messages, and we won't mention that.
So that's what it is.
Okay.
Stories which occur after Mosaic law, which are understood in context of Mosaic law, even though they're not stated on the front end, of course. Here's an illustration which our book would use, what we call, they put it in the category of history. Okay? But there's some story dimension to it. Okay? So we'll look at this one. It's a complete story, multidimensional. Historically, it explains the succession of Judah's kings, of course. And theologically, it chronicles the spiritual history of Israel and its leaders. And there would be also, we shall see perhaps a moral dimension to that as well, which is kind of related to the theological, I guess. Story of the time and place setting, told in Jerusalem. Let's get that story. First, 2 Kings 15, 1-7. I don't have that one. The 27th year to Jeroboam, the king of Israel. Azariah, the son of Amaziah, king of Judah, began to reign. Okay. The son of 16 years he was when he began to reign. 16 years old. And 52 years he reigned in Jerusalem. Right? Now notice this. And the name of his mother was Jeconiah, Jeconiah. How would they transliterate that in English? Jeconiah?
Jeconiah.
What is it?
Jeconiah.
Jeconiah, right. From Jerusalem. Now there's a narrative statement in there, and we'll examine why it's there. Okay, so he did evil, he did that which was right in the eyes of Yahweh. Right? By the way, that phrase, in the eyes of Yahweh and doing what is right, that implies covenant. Okay, right? Okay. According to all which his father Amaziah had done, only the high places they did not remove. Might be significant as a detail here. Of course, you want to deal with the textual problem there. There's a little textual problem, you notice, with the they did not remove. That is talking about this king, and yet they did not remove. Right? So, maybe some connectedness between the king and the people that needs to be evaluated there in that regard. Still, the people were sacrificing and burning incense in the high places. So there's an issue of high places there, right? That may have some, actually it does have some covenantal dimension as well. Okay, so Yahweh then would put a plague on the king. Okay? And the people didn't remove this, and the king got busted for it. Maybe there's something there, huh? And he was a leper until the day of his death. And he dwelled in the house of basically a hospital, essentially. Okay? And Jotham, the son of the king, was over the palace, if you will, judging the people of the land. The remainder of the deeds of words of Azariah and all which he had done, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And Azariah slept with his fathers, and they buried him with his fathers in the city of David, and Jotham, his son, reigned in his place. Right? So, some things about this, which have both a historical dimension, but it also has a story dimension to it. And the narrative is there completely. So, the story of the time and place focuses Jerusalem and Judah. The dates are, which is a historical thing we have to track down, of course. It was 790 to 740. Co-regency for the king during 750 to 740. In other words, he was in the hospital and his son was sitting on the throne. The story has a plot. Tension was set up in verses 3 and 4. What is tension involved in verses 3 and 4?
He did what was right in the eyes of Yahweh, but he didn't remove the high places.
Except they did not remove the high places. Somehow it had something to do with the high places, right? Okay, so that kind of demands a reflection, if you will, on what's the importance of high places. And you were reading from what text?
VHS.
Oh, where's it? Okay. I noticed him looking at him saying, what is he doing? We're reading from King James or what?
That's true.
Let's see, Numbers 33, verses 51 to 52. 33 here. Okay, 51, 52. Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, you are passing over this Jordan, the land of Canaan, and you will dispossess all the dwellers of the land before them, and you'll destroy all their various idols, if you will, and all the idols, their molten images, if you will. You shall break down and actually destroy, and all their most high places you shall destroy. So, that was a command, that was a regulation, right? And they did not remove the high places. A little bit of a problem there. The resolution is in verse 5. And what is the resolution in verse 5? How is it resolved? Well, from one point of view, it's a problem for Azariah, right? And apparently nothing was done with respect to that. And so how did this resolve? He was removed, if you will, from sitting on the throne. He went to the hospital. He was a leper. So in one sense, the problem wasn't resolved for the nation. It was taken out of his hands and he was judged for it. Right? So that really would be classified as a nice comic version here. It's more of a tragic version. Okay. Primary character is Uzziah or Azariah. Azariah is the primary name in this passage. Previous king Amaziah was like the pull over the spiritual character of Uzziah. Right? Previous character, because it says something about his father there. He did that which is right in the eyes of his father, as all the things which Amaziah has what his father has done. Right? So there's some sort of a character transfer that took upon this. Now notice this. Uzziah's mother, Jechaliah, probably occurs to add historical references. More than one person by the name of Azariah lived in Israel's history, right? So what's the point of this little phrase? That's right? It's to define closely which person we have in mind here, because there's more than one Azariah, right? And so that's the purpose. Now, would that be the theme of your message? Well, no. It's an aside, if you will. Okay?
Why? I missed why Uzziah in here. Why Uzziah? Is that just how it gets translated sometimes?
No. That's the name that's given for in Chronicles.
Oh. Same person?
Same person. Okay, so at any rate, we know why this statement is in here. Okay. This little phrase, narrator throws in there just to clarify, make sure we got the right guy. And I'm thinking, political leadership. Okay, and here's the last part. Jotham. The people provided the cause for the judgment of Uzziah. Probably should be Azariah. But that became the secondary character. Okay. People, secondary. In a sense, they seem to be in part at fault. However, the king didn't press the point. The people didn't remove it. But the king probably didn't command it. Right? And so they're kind of put in a secondary category there. So they stand between Uzziah's life in favor of God and out of favor of God from the standpoint of his rule. And Jotham is another tertiary figure who figures in the resolution of the problem and always being set apart aside. Okay? And then, of course, as time moves on, he becomes the next king, of course. So that becomes an integral part of this big picture. Here is only a tertiary part of it, but in the big picture is a significant part. Okay?
What about God?
What?
What about God as a character?
God as a character? Well, yeah, that would be one. I mean, he would be involved, obviously, right?
How would you define his character in this little snippet?
From the standpoint of the relationship between the king and God and his role as king, it's tied to covenant obedience there, right? And he did not, he did not press that point with the people. Okay? And so God judged him for that.
So, kind of, there were, in the three that they mentioned in the book, he'd be like an agent in a way, or...
In a sense, I suppose, although it's kind of hard to say an agent, there's no personality, I wouldn't say that.
Right.
Okay. In fact, he does do something, right? I mean, he became a leveler. But in the other story, that is in the Chronicles passage, I believe, I don't have the passage in front of me, so I'm not sure exactly what page number it is. But I believe it's much more definitive as to God's involvement in his becoming a leveler. So at least two purposes for this. Could perhaps see more. Uzziah succeeded Amaziah as king of Judah. He ruled 52 years, part of which is holy as Jotham, the rest of historical purpose. That's just simply the big historical goal of this book. Political leadership in Judah must assume a spiritual leadership role, where Yahweh may set aside its political leaders for sociological and moral purposes. And so, could there be any application dimension to this part of the text that is legitimate growing out of this story, this narrative, this history? You wouldn't get anything out of the pure history part, that is the succession of humans, other than potentially the passing on of the spiritual characteristics from Amaziah to Uzziah. Because it said he functioned just like his father did, doing everything God wanted to do. Well, almost everything, right? So there's something to be said about that. That's of significance. Okay. But there's also something to be said about, as a leader, as a king, he becomes a responsible person for how the nation is responding covenantally. And so, in this instance, since he didn't push the issue in the high places, he didn't have the people removed, and God judged him, which can have some impact at maybe not the national leadership level. Of course, the principle probably applies, but certainly can on smaller, narrower leadership levels. The leader in the church, right? There's sin in the congregation, and you don't do anything about it. And you didn't commit the sin, but you're a responsible person for that community. I mean, that's what the Bible says. The New Testament says, right? And therefore, it's a liability if you don't do anything. It well rests on you. Right? So I think there's a principle that can pass on, grow out of this, and apply. I think you can find clear New Testament evidence for that. Okay. That's just a couple. Yes?
Adam told me he did a search and found it in 2 Chronicles 26.
Oh, 2 Chronicles 26, okay, and what...
It's interesting because it doesn't mention the high places like I expected it to, but it did mention that he went into the temple himself to try to... And then...
And God did the leprosy.
It was interesting because the priest's name was Azariah.
Uh-huh.
Which is interesting to me.
Yeah. So there's a different purpose for the Chronicles putting the story in. It becomes much more of a story in the Chronicles
whole chapter
than in the Book of Kings here. Okay. I put this in a discovery a while back. Because I was focusing on different issues, some of the things we've already said. And something about history in and of itself is telling that everything that's in there is purpose based upon the purpose of the book, and so you select or deselect. And I just described the history a little bit here and explain the history, notice the purposes of it, but then simply coming down to these points could potentially be application points going out of it. God's promises are irrevocable, which goes back to covenant we're talking about. And that works two ways. I mean, he promises good, he also promises bad. You blow it, you get it, right? And sinfulness cannot nullify God's promises. So he didn't become more merciful and say, well, I'll forgive you this time, but this is acting. God both sets up and dethrones kings. That's involved here. He certainly did that. He alone is the sovereign of the universe. God's actions toward individuals often have the broader community of faith in focus. I think God is only concerned about Uzziah? No, I don't think so. Right? Because he was responsible and the people weren't functioning right, properly. He was partly responsible for that. Okay. Well, that's just a brief, very brief story. I've got this other one, exercise in First Chronicles. Now I'm approaching this exercise from the standpoint of, the whole procedure of working exegetically to interpret the passage. Let's get all our methodology involved here, okay? So that's how I'm going to handle this one for us to see how far we get. I'll show you the whole scope of it here.
I have a question about the King's passage. One of the things we talked about was noticing details. Is the detail of the specific type of punishment being leprosy something? Is that going a little overboard, or would that be an important detail to maybe get to?
I think it would be an important detail because leprosy has a thematic connectedness throughout the history of Israel, starting all the way back from Seminary, if you recall, right? Back in Moses' day. But there's that stigma that's attached itself to it, and it's one of those things that a person is no longer allowed to go into the temple, no longer allowed to offer the sacrifices, etc., etc. When you banish from that activity based upon that. So, in one sense, according to the Chronicles passage, he violated the rules of the temple, and now he no longer can even go to the temple.
And not just that, but one of the things that stuck out from the Second Chronicles passage is that how much that affected his relationship with other people.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things we didn't talk about and Kim and I talked about, but the concept of the covenant was not just for the relationship between us and God, or them and God, but also amongst themselves, how to live.
Oh, yeah.
And so in this situation, because of his lack of respecting the covenant, it's now, for the rest of his life, it affects his relationship with the rest of his people.
That's true. There's also an added dimension to that, is it's a relationship between people and God, but also the people to one another, because if I begin to violate, if we're in covenant, you see, and I begin to violate the covenant, well, that's going to affect the people there too, because if God judges, say, us as a community, well, you're affected. Mm-hmm. Take Achan, for example. He violated a rule, right? I mean, he's the only one who violated the rule. If you remember the story of Joshua's taking Ai. He violated the rule, stole stuff, and a lot of the people died. There's a responsibility at the horizontal level, too, isn't there? It's just the same way in church, isn't it? We are a covenant with Christ. God, and it's an individual thing between me and God. Well, yeah, but it's not only individual, right? Because that affects the other members of the church, right?
You bet.
And so there's a whole lot of issues there. Okay, here's a story. Let's see if I can just get the screen. Let's see. Oh, okay, I got the whole story here. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. Now, just here it is first. In the first part of the story, if you will, or the event, is to read the text and observe, maybe, as we read the text, some things that may become of significant interest later on as we do the details. Okay? So here's simply what the text says. And the Philistines heard that David had been anointed to be king over all Israel. Right? Now, when we get into the history, we find out that he had been anointed to be king over all Israel, but he wasn't yet ruling all of Israel. In fact, he was still a heathen at the time. And all the Philistines came up to seek, yes, for war, that is, that's a concept of going into to seek with hostile intent. David. And David heard and he went out to confront him, if you will. So there's a setting in this, there's a situation being set up here. Okay. Now notice this involved here with subject fronted here. We're in a circumstantial clause that's going to throw out a historical note, and it would not be part of a direct flow. And so you would translate it. The Philistines had come and they had raided the valley of Rephaim. So that probably occurred prior to, in fact, David's movement on it. It's not the story picks up. So David asked and inquired of God. So now here's part of it before it becomes a story. And notice, well, I'll get to this later, but you can see it already. I mean, you can see the narrator saying some things, and it's just a big block of time, a big block of stuff, right? Philistines heard something, David was anointed king, and they went up and to engage in battle, and David went out to meet him, right? I mean, we have no real slowed down aspect. And now, notice this, verse 10 now. And David inquired of God, saying, now we're in really a slow mode here, right? You can see the pacing here, it's kind of slowed down a little bit. He's asking God, should I go up against the Philistines? And will you give them into my hand? Right, so there's a question, pronged, and he said, Yahweh, notice. Okay, Yahweh said to him, not God said to him, but Yahweh said to him, go up, and I will give them into your hand. Now notice a repetition. There's a repetition here. An exact repetition here. Should I go up and will you give them into my hand? Go up and I'll give them into your hand. I mean, in our idiom, what would we say? Should I go up and will you give them into my hand? We would say, yeah. But now there's repetition, right? It's significant, maybe, perhaps. I'm just throwing things out, probably proleptically here, but it's too far in advance. But I'm saying, in reading the text and familiar with certain things, you begin to see them all around the front end of this. And so now, notice how this moves. And they went up then, and they went up unto Baal Perazim, and they smote them there. David smote them there. Well, that's a pretty... No, it didn't take us 3 days to get there, and we got our battle in array, and we got our weapons sharpened up, and we had this fierce battle, and we won. No, nothing there. The narrator breaks in and just, that's not the key. He just wants to move us so we can get to the things that are more significant for him at this point. And David said, now notice this, so that they did the deed there. And then David said, well, God has overflowed, literally, busted forth against my enemies, putting them into my hand. As a little imagery here, like the bursting forth of water. Right? Notice a little aside from the narrator here. Therefore they call the name of that place Baal Perazim. Right? There's a little ideological statement from the narrator breaking in here. From this event came the name of the town or area. Right? And so there's one of those little ideological statements that occur. Now verse 12. And they, notice, and they, there's no statement as to who the they are at this point. That's a little ambiguous right on the surface. And they forsook their God. Now you could translate that way. Their God. It's plural, it's Elohim. The question that arises when we get into the exegetical side, right, we got it right. I mean, is it the they, the Philistines here, or is they the Israelites? We hope it's not the Israelites. And they forsook their God, I'll call it gods. And David said, really, you have to say, probably commanded, and they were burned with fire. So God. So now in the context we're probably talking about idolatry and stuff, right? And so probably they who forsook their gods are probably the Philistines. It's more clearer in the illustration, in the parallel. Then verse 13. The story continues. It's not done. So we could say that there's two parts to this. There's two scenes to this. Actually, there may be more than one scene, aspects of the scene. Certainly, 8 through 12 is one section. And then 13, when they do this all over again, and the Philistines again raided in the valley. Came back. They learned their lesson. Okay? Right? Notice, so that's a repetition of their activity. And it's just a brief statement. They did it again, right? And then, again, David inquired of God. Now he slowed it down, and you see now there's a parallel here. Clearly a parallel, right? Between these two scenes, if you will, okay? So David inquired again of God, and notice something. Well, maybe you don't notice it. And God said to him, don't go up behind them or after them. Okay? Go back around and surround them, so to speak. Go back behind them and come to them on the opposite side of the trees, which are kind of trees. Some of them don't go up the way you're thinking, perhaps. But but depart on and sneak around the other side.
Strategic.
Now there's something here that we talk about that should be probably observed right off. And what would that be? Are
we assuming what David said?
Well, okay. It's in that brain. It's something that's not there. It's omitted. Look at how much parallelism we got. The Philistines came and they raided in the valley, right? And Philistines came and they again raided in the valley, right? After that, they raided, and David inquired of God. And now here, and David inquired of God again. And up here, and he asked God a question. And here he doesn't ask God anything. Right? And here God told him, responded to his very question exactly word for word, say, you got it right, Yahweh, go for it. And here, he gave him some instructions, rather specific instructions. But there's an omission. The omission is, what did David ask him this time? And that kind of raises, just you say, some not only questions in your mind, but it kind of, there's kind of a little mystery about this. There's something left out, right, that is probably there, left out to give us some, what should we say, some opportunity to begin to imagine what in the world is, why the difference here. Okay. Were you going to say something? Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I automatically assume it's the same thing. He inquired of the Lord, can we go get him? Especially because of his response.
Right. Notice then the fact that God repeated his response to his questions in the exact same words, right? Mm-hmm. He asked this question and God's used the same words and saying, yes, go ahead and do it. Now here, potentially then, he wasn't on the same track, right? And he got some different instructions.
Or even if he said the exact same thing, should we just go up and get him? He says no. So whatever, almost you could assume that whatever he said was not the opposite, but it was of the desire to go get him, but just not in the same way.
Right. So the omission here raises then, the question, and it brings out a certain element here of David, in a sense. He apparently knew that was pretty much on track with God's desire in the first scene, but apparently was not on the same wavelength in the second scene. Also, interestingly enough, on the first scene, where it first initially happened, the name Yahweh is used. In the second here, it isn't Yahweh down here. It's God, right? Which is perhaps significant.
Well, maybe he was, in a sense, in a hurry just to go up and do it the same way. And he's saying, no, there's a better way to do this.
Right. So notice how lengthy this gets here. Okay? So God said, well, don't go up, you want to sneak around behind him and come up and back, and it'll happen. And God's still talking to you.
And that also makes me think of the topography, the setting.
Yeah.
And now I'm really curious of where this place was.
Right.
And was it a hill that, if they would have came up this way, they would have been above, and then if they would have been along.
That's where you would go into a historical study on the geography of it. And it happened, and God is still talking when you hear the sound of the marching in the trees, on the tops of the trees. That's just an interesting phrase in and of itself, marching above the trees. Okay.
Sounds like coming down.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There's imagery involved with that, both spatial imagery as well as auditory imagery, etc. Then you should go out into the battle. Okay. This first time we got to mention the battle. All we have here is they smote him, and that was it. There was no battle. There was just a smiting, instant smiting here into the battle, because God, notice, has gone out before you to smite the camp of the Philistines. So there is a pretty lengthy statement on God's part, and no statement on David's part. That is no initial recorded statement. So there's a lot of repetition, but there's a mission there that is pregnant in and of itself. I mean, with me, potentially. And so it finishes, and David did as God commanded him, and they smote the camp of the Philistines. Here's another repetition. I'm going to go out before you. When you hear this, I'm going to smite the camp of the Philistines, and then God's gone out to the camp to smite the camp, right? But how did he do it? Well, they went out and smote the camp, right? So God and man is apparently working together at this point, right? Okay. From Gibeon unto Gara. Now notice the ending of this story again. And the reputation of David went forth in all the lands, and Yahweh had given his dread, or put his dread upon all things. Now, there is significant conclusion to that, isn't it? Right? I mean, it broadens out the whole intent or the reason for the importance of this story. It broadens it out, doesn't it? But in broadening it out, the story itself has some really narrow time frame issues here. Some broad ones and some narrow ones, right? I mean, pacing there, you can see the potential tension there, right? Perhaps the quandary on the part of David, what do we do this time? Right? We do the same thing. So anyway, there's just reading the story and with our introduction that we've given already about this kind of stuff, we can see that there's perhaps a lot of things, that go into here that need to be considered, right? And certainly, what carries an awful lot of the importance of this, beyond just that last verse, is the dialogue between God and David. Right? I mean, the event, it tells us an awful lot about David. His relationship to God, and at this stage in his life, and wanting to do what God tells him to do, presumably his ability to connect with God and everything. It doesn't tell us a lot about the Philistines, except they just apparently didn't learn their lesson. Okay? Because they came back again, right? And lost the second time. Right? But the issue really gives some information about David there. That's of significance. So anyway, that's just the reading. A little beyond the reading already. Historical background, so I just taken this. Now it's important, this is in 1 Chronicles, so we need to understand the purpose of 1 Chronicles. Just somehow fits, ask ourselves the question after we go through the higher criticism of 1 Chronicles, its purpose, its themes, and all of that thing. How does it fit and does it fit? Right? Do I understand it? Okay? And I put it in the context of the whole book. So we have just the basic stuff on the historical background, the author, probably we won't get into all the details of this, you can read it yourself on Bible.org, except for my changes and modifications. The date, about 450 to 425 BC. The writing of the book is right, not the event itself. The event itself is a lot earlier than that. This is the writing of the book, so it's post-exilic. Chronicles are post-exilic book. Title of the book, well, we don't need to get into the title, but just read this little quotation here. Here, the Kings gives man's viewpoint. Chronicles tends to give God's perspective. A little bit of a different focus there, perspective, according to this writer in there. Theme and purpose, again, is outline history from Adam to the death of Saul. The rest of the book is about the reign of kings. The books of Chronicles seem like a repeat of Samuel and Kings. And as you read it too, obviously, you can see there's a lot of similarities. But they were written for the returned exiles, a reminder that they came from the royal line of David and that they were God's chosen people. Remember, who came back, and the focus is, we shall see, on Jerusalem, the nation of Israel, right? There's no focus upon Seminary and what's going on there. Why? Well, the people who came back, there were Samaritans up there, but there weren't any Jews up there. Right? So the southern kingdom of Judah is what essentially got reestablished. So the Chronicles emphasize the role of law, the priesthood, and the temple. When Solomon's temple is gone, the second temple we regard as linked to the first. There's some problems that occurred during the comeback, and we get that from Ezra, Nehemiah, as well as some of the prophets in here. Apostasy, idolatry, intermarriage. There's some of the reasons for their problems. Keywords are David 183 times in the big covenant involved, so there's some connection there. Some key verses. Well, there was the key verses look like. Chronicles is the end of the Bible, not the middle of the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible. Okay. Nehemiah, Chronicles, let me say 11. Let's see. 11, chapter 11. Okay, and again, chapter 11, verse 1. And all Israel got together to David at Hebron, saying, Behold, what is this? Oh, we are your flesh and blood. We are your flesh and blood. Also, blood and flesh, and bones and flesh, actually, is flesh and blood, bones and blood. Also, previously, in the days of Saul the king, you were going out, and you were coming in for Israel, as you were acting on Israel's behalf. And Yahweh said, your God said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will be a prince over my people Israel, right? And there's a issue there. So all the elders of Israel came up to the king at Hebron, and they made a covenant there, and he ended up as the anointed king over Israel, according to the word of Yahweh by the hand of Samuel. So that takes us all the way back to the early days of David and Samuel episode, right? So that promise came about way back when. So that's a key verse. 17, 11, 14, chapter 17. You can read it all, but we get some of those. It happened when David, his house, David said to Nathan the prophet, Behold, I am sitting in the house of the cedar house. And the ark of the covenant of Yahweh is, Nathan said to David, everything was in your heart, do. Well, he wanted to build a temple, right? So there's a key issue that's coming up here off the temple, and David was not allowed to do that. Right? So Solomon ended up building a temple. So that's a focus. That's becoming the focus here for the book. Chapter 29, 11, following there. Where is that? David blessed Yahweh, the God of all the congregation. David said, Blessed you are Yahweh, the God of Israel, Father, from forever, ever, and ever. To you, O Yahweh, is greatness and majesty and beauty and all that. And so he's praying in relationship to both the temple and his worship, the temple and his role. Keys for the book. Outline. Notice just a basic outline. Genealogies start off, and that gets rather tedious. One time I was preaching from the Jabez story, and I would have to have somebody read the text. So I had one of the elders, the deacon, who would read the text this morning. Okay, here's the text. I had him read all those names, from chapter 4. And he was struggling to that was cruel on my part, cruel and unusual. But then he came to finally to 10, and that was the whole point. To get a break in the middle of this, and with this story of Jabez here, 10, verses 10. 9 and 10. It was great. Anyway, but then starting at chapter 10, we got the rise and anointing of David and our past. And this is from 10 to 9, 70. That's David's time. capture of Jerusalem, heroes of David, then David's reign, and my passage, or our passage, now comes David's reign, victory of the Philistines in that section there. And you notice then that it's kind of related to Jerusalem, moving from Hebron, where the throne, so to speak, was, and it's moving to Jerusalem, right? There's a movement in that direction. And the ark then eventually gets to Jerusalem, and then later on he wants to build a temple, and the covenant is even later. And so we pinpoint where our story occurs. It's right in the early stages of David's reign and his consolidation of the kingdom, the whole nation, if you will, and from Hebron to Jerusalem. And so that's where it fits. We don't get into all the other stuff. Notice, just as I don't know if you know about this book or not, but this book is a helpful little book. It's loose in here. And just put the contents. Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, where the parallels are. Okay? And maybe in your study Bible, you just find the same issue here. And there's about Chronicles. Then we get down to chapter 14. Chapter 14, First Chronicles, one I have here. First Chronicles 14. I'm not too far.
There you go.
There we go.
2 Samuel 5.
Oh, yeah. 14, 1 to 17, I've got Roman 1 throwing me off here. 2 Samuel 5, 11 to 25. Alright? So that are going to be significant. Why would it be important to be able to identify that right off?
I don't know.
Well, because there can be some variations occurring in the two descriptions, right?
Oh.
And even some textual problems that you almost expect. If there's any variation, then the probabilities are there's going to be textual issues involved with that. Maybe even some different kind of wording, and of course, different kind of wording perhaps based upon the fact that the kings had one purpose and the Chronicles had a little bit of a different purpose, right?
Would you say one would be more chronological than the other?
I don't think more chronological than the other. I don't think so.
But it looks like 1 Samuel goes, and that may just be how he set up his chart, but some of the stories don't match up chronologically.
Oh, you mean how he's 1 Samuel going right through the book, and this one is a little different?
Yeah, I'm saying is 2 Samuel more chronologically accurate than...
Oh, I think they're both accurate. But there's different organizations going on. As we saw just in the outline. Huh? Like
right there you got the passage we just looked at, 14,
right.
1 through 17, but then in 2 Samuel 6, it has chapter 13. In 1 Chronicles
6:13. What is this? 2 Samuel 6, 1 to 11. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and
this is 1 Chronicles 13, 1 to 14. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, a little difference in the variation. Variation. I wouldn't. I'd have to examine those to see if, in fact, there's any kind of chronological connectedness as stated or implied, which becomes problematic. Could become problematic.
Because at the top of the Chronicles chart,
right? At
the top of that page, right there you got 10, and then down below you have 3, chapter 3.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then
right, but notice what it's... right. I won't say anything more about that.
I was just curious.
Right. Mm-hmm. So that becomes one of the issues in dealing with the Chronicles and the Kings and Samuel is these parallelisms that you have to deal with. And that'll come into play. We'll see in a minute here. It'll come into play. And here's the parallel text. Now, we've already read the text for for the passage, I should say, that I have listed there. Now let's see if you can notice any differences here. Okay? And it starts at 17. And the Philistines heard that they had anointed David to be king over Israel. And all the Philistines went up to seek, with aggressive intent, David. And David heard, and he went down to the stronghold. He went down to the stronghold. A little difference there from what we read, right? We just said before that David went out before them more than even. Now we get a little more different thing here. He went out to a place called Stronghold, or to what do you say, a place where in fact they could see as potential valid site in their favor. And then the same kind of an idea here, and now the Philistines had come and they had been actually it said here, in the other text it said raided in the valley of Wretlind. Here it doesn't say raided. Right? It says they kind of were spread out, if you will, for battle formation. Right? So there's a little difference involved with that. Right? And David had inquired then God, saying, should I go up against the Philistines, and will you give them into my hand? And Yahweh said, in the same terms to David, go up, because I will give. And now we've got a definitive absolute, infinitive absolute along with the verb, right? I will surely, give the Philistines into your hand, right? So there's a little difference in the syntax of this, some conceptual differences so far. And David came into Baal Perazim, this place, okay, and he smote them there. Smacked them. Same kind of abrupt, just whacked them, that's it. Okay. And said, Yahweh has broken out against my enemies. Broken out against my enemies before me, like the breaking out of water. Therefore, call the name of that place Baal Perazim. That's pretty simple. Similar kind of idea. Now notice this. And they forsook their what? Idols. Not their gods. That is the terminology, right? And then this statement. Okay? And David bore them away, David and his men lifted them up, carried them off. Oh, well, the other passage says they were burned. Right? It's a little different.
They carried the people off the idols.
Well, that's good. I presume they burned the idols. I didn't carry the idols off, but not for purposes of worshiping them. I presume they gathered them together and put them on.
And to get closer so they could get marshmallows.
Yeah, right. Victory celebration. Well, okay, and again then, got this next statement, and again the Philistines, it just says, and they again began to act the same way, same thing, and they spread out then again in the valley of the Eden. And then again David inquired of God, and he said, don't go up, go behind them, if you will, and come to them from the opposite side of the trees, same kind of tree. And it will happen when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the trees, then you will, this is a word. It said, instead of going out to battle, this is a word for, then you will exercise, we can say, aggressive behavior, okay? Because then Yahweh has gone out before you to smite in the camp of the Philistines. And David did and thus, as Yahweh commanded him, and he smote the Philistines from Geba unto the one who comes to Gezer. Right? So there's some differences there, right? Not
Now,
major differences.
one thing I didn't notice before, the valley of Wretlind, those things came back to the same place twice. Now, is the valley big?
Well, that's
Or did they whoop them out of the north and then they left and then went down to the south? Or?
we'll show you in a minute.
Oh, okay.
No, that's a good question. The question is, do we do a little, so to say, investigation as to the movement of troops and whatnot, and get a visual of that and through the maps? Yes, we can. And I have a picture for it. But that's a good question to ask, because that's something that you'll program yourself for searching out. You might want to put it here. I put it actually a little later in my analysis here. Okay. So those are just some introductory things that thus far essentially what we've done to the procedure is what? Well, number one, read the text, got to learn how to read the text, right? And then we did our historical study on Chronicles and then connected up, found the interconnections between Seminary and Wretlind. And that's going to be important for us to know, right? See what kind of variations there really are. And they're not major, but there are some significant ones that are there when we read Samuel. Okay. So now the analysis part comes. That's when we do the detail work, right? Okay. So I start off with my diagram here, and then I go to my analysis, and then I have to readjust my diagram sometimes. And there's a couple places, as I said before, look, there's a couple of places where, in fact, I had found after doing the diagram, this just does not work when I analyze it, the textual analysis. And another situation where I did a textual analysis and it said, it worked the other way around. So I have to make adjustments. In fact, I chose not to adjust it yet so I can show you that, I make mistakes sometimes. But I discover my mistakes. That's the good thing. Right? Okay, by the way, just reading these, you have to be able to read the text and read the diagram. But reading the diagram is also can be very helpful in myself. I did something different here that I've never done quite before. I don't know if I like that way. Doing it, I'll see. This is that aside that, that circumstantial clause that really isn't in the flow. The flow is they heard, right? And David heard. They heard he had made king. David heard that they went up to battle, and David heard it, and he went out. Now the Philistines had come and they had raided him. That's kind of a circumstantial kind of thing there. And then David talked to God, and God talked to David and said, I've done that before, setting that off, in other words, from the main flows. Okay, now this is just some basic breakdowns. I'll stop it occasionally just to simply point out some things. We've done this before, term analysis, but here. Chapter 10 begins the chronicler's description of David's reign. The rulership in Hebrew extends to all Israel. The throne was relocated to Jerusalem. The parallels at the end of 2 Samuel 5. Okay, let's just bring some of that information in. But it's interesting that the throne is relocated, but he doesn't actually get the full reconstitution of the 40 there until he brings the ark and whatnot there. Okay?
Why did you put it there?
What?
Why did you insert that information there? Was it because of all of Israel?
Yeah, this statement here, to reign over all of Israel.
Okay.
You can put it somewhere else.
Well, I like it there.
Okay. Then when I put these things in here, it's because I've done a little work, a little word study factor here on the words, because bakash basically means to seek. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean to go to war. It means to seek. You can seek God, you can seek your animals, you can seek, your brother, whatever. Here, according to BDB, in doing a word study, in context where there's conflict. Okay? So it's seeking to engage in battle in this context. So put that way. Here, Philistines, I'm looking at, went out before them. Let's see where, the Septuagint reads, to meet them along the Vulgate. This is pretty, what should we say, not unclear, but a very vague kind of idea before them. What does that mean? The Septuagint was expanding upon that a little bit, and so did the Vulgate, and that became a textual issue. Okay, 14 here, not yet. Okay. Now the textual issue is not one where there's Hebrew manuscript differentiation there. Okay. But just noting the fact that what the Septuagint and others were doing, what the question they had in mind was, it was probably because it just seemed too vague, and so they wanted to make it a little clearer there. In other words, went out and said go out to meet them, as opposed to just went out before them. You could interpret that meaning you ran away from them. You could interpret that phrase and mean it that way. Right?
Is there any confusion of who them is?
I don't think in this instance, increasing context, there's two groups involved, David and Philistine. So I don't think there's any confusion there. In fact, the only plural, that is, if the pronoun is plural, then the antecedent of that would be the Philistines here. There's nothing plural prior between them.
Gotcha.
Verse sets a circle to verse 9. I'm just suggesting here that it sets up a circumstantial setting for the action. Okay? So, and then reading from St. Couch Cowley, where they talk about that kind of structure, I just put that in there so that I could, if I had to go back and review the issue, I could go, I know where I got it from. So the statement of peculiar circumstances in which a subject appears performing some action, or under which an action or occurrence is accomplished, may especially by means of noun clause connected by vav. And that's where we said, look, this is the vav is connecting. It's not a vav consecutive. See, it's vav conjunctive connecting to the noun as opposed to the verb, which usually sets apart circumstantial clause. Okay? And then we have that phrase. Let's see. Again, the issue here is the difference in Samuel. You see, they said they raided. That's what that means. Okay. But in Samuel, as if when we read that, it was different here. They spread out for what purpose? Well, for plunder. Okay. Really, the meaning is basically the same thing. In the valley called Rephaim. Now, here's the valley of Rephaim marked from the SBEP, which is the Zondervan Pictorial Encyclopedia of the Bible. The north end of the valley of Rephaim marked the north boundary of the tribe of Judah, at the same time the south boundary of the tribe of Benjamin. So after David captured Jerusalem, the Philistines heard about his being anointed. They camped in the valley of Rephaim, anticipating attack on the capital of Israel, which is Jerusalem. David took up a challenge and defeated the people. So it's good at this point then just kind of get a feel of what you want to do. Okay? Get a feel for the map. Not just so you don't have the whole thing there. Here's Hebron. So he moved up. This is the Israelite force down here. He moved up here to protect, if you will, Jerusalem. Here's where the valley is, and the first group, if you will, of the Philistines are coming in this direction here, and this is where they capture Bethlehem, actually. And then they come up and they engage in combat here. It's the first defeat of the Philistines.
So, how do we know, or where was it mentioned that Bethlehem?
What?
The capture of Bethlehem?
Where does that occur?
Philippines. Yeah.
Well, the Philistines seem to have captured Bethlehem during the conflict, 2 Samuel 23. is smoke and flames. Okay, so that's really general statement. The second time the Philistines came up, they came up a little different attack here. They had to go through some apparently rugged territory, came to the valley of Wretlind again, and David met them there the second time. And then they chased them all around, up through here, all the way over to here. So, this is the, let's see, which atlas is this? Macmillan, whatever the Bible is, pretty detailed on these things. Okay? So, and I've got that map on a couple of places to show you why. I won't point it up again, but I'll show you why I did it a couple of places. Okay, so then we've got the next section in, David inquired God. I put B behind 82 because of the syntax at this point. I could have, that's why we got it listed there. Because of the syntax with God, the inquiries, the child plus the bait. That's why you want to look at the syntax. And that's how that works it out, so I'll just connect that up. Okay. Should I go? The carré is read here. Notice if you can read the text, if you look at the text in verse 10, in my Bible here, not my one, not the one I got up on the board, you see there's got the Philistines, but it's got two yods in there. Okay? In the text. Well, the reading on the mark, carré over there, is with one yod. So there's a textual problem. I changed the text at this point, and with the recognition that the probable issue is that there was a scribal photography of the yod that is put in two instead of one. Okay. So it's probable scribal error. Even if it wasn't, it's just a spelling error, essentially, and it doesn't change anything. But I changed the text, so I put that note in there.
What verse was that on again?
10. 2 yods in there. With the Philistines. And with Yahweh now, this is where I mentioned that this could be potentially significant. The first name of God may be significant, but then notice at verse 14, and we pointed that out earlier, at verse 14, see, it's what God said to him and not Yahweh. So there's a difference in the terminology used. From the divine perspective, Yahweh is fulfilling his promise to David regarding kingship, and his feet of enemies of the state as part of that promise. Okay, that was the first attack when it came about. So perhaps that's significant at that point. Okay. Then we've got another little issue here. Here in verse 11, they went up to Baal Perazim in verse 11. They came up. There's a textual problem there. You note, reading with few manuscripts, and the Septuagint and the Vulgate and the Syria has the difference of singular as opposed to plural. And so there's some Hebrew manuscript variation there. And it suggests, compare 2 Samuel 5:20 on 2 Samuel 5:20, okay, which we had earlier. I'll show you what that means. Get back here. 2 Samuel 5:20, verse 20. Oh, it's up here. 5:20. It doesn't use went up. You see. It says in our text, they went up. Okay. David went up. Here it says, he came or went. It's a different word. And it's singular. That's why they're pointing us to this verse. It's singular here. David went to Baal Perazim. Okay. So I'm saying, following the lead of 2 Samuel, some manuscripts change it. Okay? But you can take the canon of dissimilar readings. Now, the scribe's tendency would be to make things agree, and not dissimilar. The question that we have to ask ourselves at this point is that an issue, and does this text itself make sense? Notice that, and it's the hardest passage is the one that we read here in the text that is the most difficult. Because it says, and they went up to Baal Perazim, and he, David, smote them. In other words, it moves from the plural to the singular, right? Well, that's the harder reading than reading the singular. He went up and smote them, right? Reading the singular. So there's at least two canons of textual criticism we can invoke at this point to keep the text as it is. Okay? Follow my thinking pattern there? Okay. So that's what's going on there. Okay, let's see. Perazim, I just put the map again because I'm trying to figure out. I just want to look again as to where that is on at this point. Okay. Let's see. Anything else I need? Oh, here do I have to fix my diagram? I have to show you what I did here. I can't figure out how in the world I did that. This all came. And one of the things that I have not recognized in this, or I didn't observe, or I didn't pay attention to the wrong verse. 11. If you look at verse 11, after mine, that is breaking forth the water. Are we done?
Yeah, I gotta change it.
Oh, okay.